Winter in the Middle Ages did not always announce itself with smoke. Some nights there was no crackling fire, no orange glow in the middle of the room, no grand hearth, like the paintings in later centuries loved to show. There was only a low house made of clay and timber, a sky of cold slate outside, frost on the small window, and yet inside the air was not cruel. It was not warm the way a blazing fire makes a room warm. It was slow warmth, patient warmth, the sort of warmth that seems to come from the walls themselves. A person sat on a wooden bench near the inner wall, wrapped in wool, and the cold did not bite. Not because there was much heat, but because there was almost no way for it to escape. We are used to thinking that medieval people were always huddled around an open fire, coughing on smoke and hoping the wind did not shift. That image is comfortable for us because we can see the source of the heat. What is harder to imagine is a room where the heat is invisible. No flames, no iron stove, no roaring chimney, only clay, fabric, wood, and air that has been persuaded to behave. Those people did not win against the cold by force. They did not pour endless fuel into houses with thin walls. They built houses that knew how to hold on. They watched how air moved, where wind squeezed in, where the floor felt damp, where breath lingered. They used that knowledge to turn entire dwellings into quiet heat machines. Imagine stepping into such a house on a day of cutting wind. Outside, the snow races through the street. The door opens only for a heartbeat, and yet when it closes, you feel stillness. The sound of the wind dies. The air does not swirl. Somewhere nearby, a clay vessel that was warmed earlier in the day is giving off a faint softness. Thick curtains do not simply decorate the wall. They slow the air. The floor is not bare earth. It is layered, packed, insulated. The ceiling is intentionally low so that what little warmth there is does not go wandering above your head. Nothing in the room is there by accident. Even the position of the inner door has a reason. Even the bench knows where to stand. This is not luxury. This is survival through intelligence. That is the part we often miss when we talk about the Middle Ages. We think of lack of fuel, lack of glass, lack of central heating. But what they truly had was attention. They paid attention to wind the way a sailor does. They paid attention to how stone cools and how wood does not cool so fast. They paid attention to the hour of the day when the house loses the most warmth. They noticed that air cannot be kept, but walls can. So they heated the house, not the emptiness. They warmed objects, not the draft. They created small climates inside larger climates. They accepted cold as a conversation, not a war. What you are about to hear is not a list of tricks. It is a way of thinking. It begins outside the house, where the village already breaks the wind before it reaches the door. It moves through the entrance, where a short passage tames the cold. It enters the main room, where thick walls act like slow-breathing lungs. It sits among furniture that stores heat, the way a field stores rain. Then, at night, it hides in box beds and under heavy cloth, where a human breath is enough to make a private summer. You will see how people who did not have radiators, or chimneys in every room, or stacks of firewood to burn whenever they pleased, still managed to live through winters that would make many modern houses complain. Listen to this with the thought in mind that almost everything they did can still be repeated today. Not because we want to live like peasants, but because the physics of air and clay and fabric never changed. A house that slows the wind will always feel warmer than a house that lets it run. A room that keeps heat in the floor will always feel softer than a room that only heats the ceiling. A bed that is a room inside a room will always give better sleep in winter. The past is not only old stories. Sometimes it is a manual that we forgot to read. So, let us start outside, where the cold is strongest and the human will is weakest. Let us see how they built not only walls, but whole settlements to confuse the wind. Because if a village can already take away half the bite of winter before it even reaches your door, imagine what the inside of the house can do. The wind arrives before winter, and it is the first mason of every medieval place. Long before a roof beam is lifted, long before clay is mixed with straw, the people walk the land and learn the paths of the air. They notice where the grass always leans, where the snow gathers in long ribs, where smoke from a shepherd's fire bends and disappears. They do not trust a single season. They remember 10 winters and 10 springs, and they build with the memory of wind. A village that survives is a village that learns to talk to the air, not to shout at it. Stand on a rise above such a village at dusk. The fields are pale, the hedges make dark seams, and the houses turn their faces in the same sober direction. They are not lined up for pride or for a painter's eye. They are turning their cheeks away from the knife. The walls that face the prevailing wind are heavier, less broken by openings, more patient in their surface. The walls that face the sun are kinder and more full of windows, small windows that sit deep in the thickness of the wall, like animals in burrows. A village is a body, and the houses are ribs, and the lanes are veins for air that must be slowed and calmed before it touches skin. The first shelter is not a door. It is the way the village sits upon the earth. A good site leans into the landscape the way a person leans into a foothill to hide from a gale. There is a back to the settlement, usually a slope or a stand of trees or a wall of older buildings that have faced the weather for a century. There is a front, usually turned toward calm fields and the morning sun. The back takes blows, the front receives light, and everything in between learns to be quiet. Streets are narrow on purpose. A wide street is a river where the wind grows arrogant and fast. A narrow street is a mill race with many paddles. Each door, lintel and eave and corner a small break upon speed. Corners are not clean 90 degrees if the brick or timber can help it. They bend, they offset, they make the air hesitate. There is a craft in this, and no charter writes it down. Yet it is practiced everywhere by people who cannot afford to lose a winter's strength to drafts. If 2 streets face each other too directly, a carpenter will set a stable there, or a low shed, or a wall for firewood, and the straight line will be broken. The village argues with the wind and wins by distraction. There are outer buildings that do not look glorious but serve as shields. Barns on the north edge, with blank walls and few whispers of openings. Take the first punishment. A stackyard is placed where it will slow a gust. Hedges are planted not because they are pretty, but because they tangle the air and make it give up its anger. A coppiced fence is half wood and half sieve. In summer, it is green and high. In winter, it is bare and full of twigs. But in both seasons, it is a net for wind. Even a line of wattle hurdles leaned at a thoughtful angle will change the way a village feels on a night when the moon is sharp as a shard of ice. If you walk with someone who knows this place, that person will show you shortcuts for feet and long routes for air. They will take you through a cart passage that is always calm, past a courtyard where the snow never drifts, into a shared space where many doors face inward. Courtyards are the lungs of the winter village. They collect warmth in the day from bodies and animals and cooking, and then they hold a quiet climate at night. The cold passes over them because it prefers a long, uninterrupted run, and a courtyard is a maze for cold. Animal life is part of the strategy. A byre pressed to the northern wall is not only for cattle. It is a body of slow heat, wrapped in wood and thatch. The stable wall that keeps a horse dry also keeps a bedroom calmer. Smokehouses and bakehouses are placed like chess pieces at the corners where wind tries to enter, and their mass becomes a declaration that air must slow. Even a stack of firewood, if racked along the back of a house, becomes a rough shield that breaks a rush of gusts into 100 soft eddies. The village is an orchestra, and every barrel, gate, and shed contributes a quiet note to drown the howl. Listen to the sounds as the evening grows older. Where streets are straight, the wind sings. Where streets bend, the wind coughs, and then mutters, and then falls silent. Look at how a door is set back from the outer wall, not flush, but recessed, so that a pocket of air lives there and cushions the space within. A threshold is sometimes lifted half a hand above the lane, so that the cold that crawls along the ground has to climb, and in climbing slows. These are not tricks taught by books. They are lessons learned by a winter that punishes laziness. The people do not rely only on structures. They change what the village means in winter. Market activity moves inward, away from the long draft of a through lane. Work that can be done under a roof is moved to shared spaces that were open to the sky in summer. The baker may lend his warm corner to the lace maker. The wheelwright may do small repairs behind a curtain near a fireless hearth that still holds the sun's gift in its bricks. This reshaping of habit is as much a part of survival as timber and stone. A village is not only walls. It is a choreography that puts bodies where air is kind. The ground itself is managed so that the wind will have less to do with the houses. Ditches are placed to speak to water, not to invite air. A ditch cut in the wrong place makes a trench. The wind will race along. A ditch cut with thought becomes a line of peace, where reeds break the speed of a gust. Snow tells the truth next morning. Where the plan is right, the snow lies in an even sheet, soft over everything. Where the plan is wrong, the snow piles like a rebuke. Children learn this truth first with their hands. They learn which lane will burn their cheeks and which lane will let them speak easily without the taste of metal on their tongues. Look at a hill path that approaches from the west. Someone has planted a line of willows a lifetime ago. They are cropped and pollarded every few years, and their stubs look like fists. In summer they are shadows and shade. In winter they are a ragged comb that the wind catches in. Each twig takes a thread of speed out of the air. By the time the wind reaches the houses below, the great roar is a tired sigh. It is a small change, but many small changes placed correctly are what keep a village from being flayed. Roofs matter as much as walls. A high, proud roof may please the eye, but in a hard climate, a roof is drawn close, like a hood. The pitch is set to shed snow evenly. The eaves are mindful rather than indulgent. The ridge is turned so that gusts slide off rather than bite. Thatch has a language with wind that tile does not. It has grip and texture, and it paints thousands of small wake zones in the air that passes over it. Birds know it, cats know it, and the wind knows it. When a gust folds down upon a thatched roof, it loses its footing and drops its cruelty. The settlement thinks in layers. First, the outer ring of fields and hedges slows the approach. Then the barns and yards catch whatever speed remains. Then the narrow lanes with their offsets and modest corners teach the wind to be careful. Then the courtyards and recesses give it no reason to gather. Then the doors set back from the plane of the wall welcome you into a pocket that is almost still. At every step the air is less rude. And, by the time you stand before the inner door of a house, you are already in a different season. There is a ritual to opening that door. You do not throw it wide. You do not brag. You pull it to you, step across the raised threshold, close it, and then you breathe. If someone follows you, they wait in the outer calm until one door is shut and another opens. Even without a crafted vestibule, the village itself has given you a prelude of slowness. There is less for the house to do inside because the community has already done half the work outside. On mornings, after a night of hard wind, you can read the success of the plan on surfaces. The snow in front of the outer barns is scalloped like pastry. The snow in the courtyards is a simple soft sheet. Frost clings to the windward shutters, but the leeward walls are dry and quiet. Icicles show you where a gap needs a new plug of tow, but there are fewer of them when the outer defences are good. In a place where wood and time are precious, saving even a handful of degrees by arrangement can spare a family a cartload of fuel in a month. Not every village has the same answer, because wind is not the same creature in every valley. In a place of long plains, they use lines of earth and woven fences to make low barriers. In a place of hills, they turn the streets along the slope, so that the wind must choose between climbing and falling rather than sprinting straight. In a place near the sea, they accept that certain days will belong to the air, and so they build extra rooms inward and put daily life there when the world outside is iron. The principle is constant. Make the wind ask permission many times, and it will spend itself before it reaches the core. You can measure the intelligence of this arrangement by the way people carry their bodies. In a badly planned place, men bend into the wind, and women draw shawls across their faces, and children run out of spite rather than play. In a well-planned place, the same people walk in winter with the posture of ordinary life. They can talk as they walk. They can pause to greet a neighbour without their words breaking into mist that hurts the throat. The difference is not luxury. It is the practical dignity of not letting the weather decide your shape. The village against the wind is not a fortress with banners and horns. It is a set of quiet agreements. A house will lend its back to another house. A farmer will plant a hedge that helps a street he does not live on. A wall will stay without a window because the sun that would come in is not worth the winter that would come in. These agreements look like sacrifices, but in their sum they are a gain. Because a calm street keeps a child healthy. A stall without a draft keeps a cow milking. A courtyard that is always gentle keeps an old person walking one more year. There is also a calendar hidden in the plan. Certain shutters are latched differently after first frost. Certain doors are treated with cloth sausages, filled with sand or chaff when the north wind returns. Certain alleys are given over to storage in deep winter because the goods placed there choke a draft that would otherwise reach a row of sleeping rooms. The living plan moves with the months. Nothing is rigid. The place adapts, and adaptation is a kind of learned warmth. When an outsider visits in late autumn, the village may look cramped. Rooms press on rooms, walls look blank, streets look watched. But when the first long wind of winter rushes across the fields and hits the back wall of the settlement and comes apart like thread, the meaning becomes clear. The village is a coat. It is not a fashion that makes you handsome. It is a garment that makes you endure. Set all of this beside our modern idea of warmth as something that comes from a switch and a bill. The medieval answer begins before any fire is lit. It begins with the humility to admit that you cannot heat the world, so you must shrink the world that touches you until it is the size you can keep. You can do that with space, with air, with habit, too, with neighborly geometry. Then, when you finally light a small fire, it is enough because the wind no longer has a corridor to steal it, and the house no longer has to fight the street, and your body no longer has to fight at all. This is why part 2 will step across the threshold. The village has done its part. The door has been closed softly. The air is almost still. Inside the house, there is no grand fireplace greeting us. Only walls that remember sunlight and floors that were made thoughtful in summer for the sake of winter. If a village can tame the wind out there, what can a house do in here, where the space is smaller and the rules are closer to the hand? The door closes and the village stays outside. The sound of the wind falls into a soft hush, and your ear begins to notice other things. A board sighs. A jar ticks as it cools. You can hear your own breath come back to you without hurry. Nothing inside this house announces heat with drama. There is no grand blaze. There is no pillar of smoke. The house seems to hold a season of its own that does not match the season outside. This is not an accident, and it is not romance. The house is a shield that was shaped for winter long before winter arrived. Stand a few steps inside and let your eyes adjust to the kind of light that candles cannot fully rule. There is clay where a modern room would show paint. There is timber where a modern room would show plaster. The walls are not thin partitions between people and weather. They are bodies. Touch one with the back of your hand. It does not feel hot and it does not feel dead. It has a slow temper. The wall will never flash warm and never give up its warmth in a rush. That is the point. People here learned that air is slippery and impatient, while stone and clay are faithful and slow. They built with the faithful and taught the impatient to behave. Look closely at the doorway behind you. It is not a flat slit cut through a plane. It is a small space unto itself. The jambs are thick. The door does not sit flush with the outer face. It is set back so that a pocket of calmer air lives between outside and inside. There is a slight rise at the threshold, so that the heavy cold which creeps along the ground must climb and in climbing lose its speed. Above the door sits a board that runs deeper than a decorative shelf. It turns the small stream of warm air that gathers under the ceiling back into the room where it can fall along the wall instead of slipping into the crack. The house is full of answers like this. Each answer is just large enough for the problem it solves, and no larger. The ceiling is lower than a proud house would prefer. That is not an economy of timber. It is a way to prevent the little warmth in the room from wandering into a space that no one uses. Heat that settles high is a gift to spiders and rafters. Heat that lingers at shoulder height is a gift to people. A low ceiling turns the upper part of the room into a quiet lake where warm air can drift and then slide down the wall in a slow circle. The whole room becomes a loop rather than a chimney. Listen long enough, and you will feel the pace of that loop in your skin. A tiny current moving around the perimeter, never rushing, always returning. Under your feet, the floor looks simple, but it is built like a patient trap for cold. The ground beneath is not left to argue directly with the boards. Someone in the dry season tamped earth and mixed in ash and sand and fine plant matter so that the layer would breathe without inviting damp. Above that lies the support that carries the boards. Between the supports lies more trapped air that never whips itself into drafts. On top, the boards are set so that they can move a little with weather and still meet closely. Then there are rush mats and rugs where feet rest longest. The house is not trying to heat air that will leave. The house is trying to keep the earth from stealing. That is a different task, and it is done with patience and layers. Now turn to the windows. They are not generous sheets that brag about the world outside. They are small and set deep. At the sill, you can sit and be within the thickness of the wall. The opening is a tunnel for light and a break for air. Cold can slip through a large flat window as through a wound. Through a deep small window it must crawl, and in crawling it calms. Shutters close at night, not only to say that the day is over, but to complete the insulation that the wall begins. Between the shutter and the frame, someone pushes a roll of cloth, stuffed with chaff or wool, so that the smallest currents will die there, instead of under a bed. In the morning, frost on the glass only means that the cold has been persuaded to spend itself where it does the least harm. Study how the inner doors stand. They rarely face one another straight across a hall. They are moved half the width of a person to one side, so that no lane for air runs from one room to the next. The house is a maze for the wind, the way the village is a maze on a larger scale. If there is a step where your foot rises only a little, it is not there to catch you. It is there to catch the flow that hunts along floors. Even a small sill can change the map of drafts. The builder did not draw arrows on paper. The family lived a winter and then another, and learned where the cold tried to travel. The house bent to those attempts and invited the cold to waste energy at every turn. Heat that is made elsewhere must be brought here without smoke and without fuss. There is a hearth in a safer room or a covered fire outside where stones and water can be warmed while the air of the living room is kept clean. When a clay jug that holds hot water enters this room, it is never thrown on a table and forgotten. It is placed in a niche cut in the inner wall. Stone and clay take a portion of that heat and accept it without complaint, and in exchange they release a gentler heat for hours. It is a trade. It is always a trade. A warmed jar may be moved later under a bench where a person sits at dusk. A warmed brick may rest near a bed so that the wood of the bed forgets its chill before a body touches it. The room is managed like a garden, where small sources of warmth are planted where they will matter. Furniture is not decoration that came here after the house was finished. Furniture is part of the structure. A heavy chest against an inner wall is thermal mass with hinges. A long bench, fixed to a partition, becomes a calm bay in the slow current of air. A place where knees do not complain and hands, remember, comfort. Shelves are deep enough that warm jars can live along the upper line of the wall where air is already kind. A woven curtain can turn a corner into a small entry for a moment, so that when a door opens, the shock does not travel. The curtain closes the door you cannot build, and opens only when a person opens it. Fabric is architecture in a soft language. Look up and you see beams that do more than hold a roof. Their faces are smooth where they need to let air slide, and rough where they must catch it. In some houses, shallow curves live under the peak of the roof like small absent arches. Warm air likes to gather there, the way swallows like to nest under eaves. The curves hold a quiet dome of heat that then feeds the walls rather than leaking through cracks. Clay along the joints of boards does more than keep out insects. It turns joints from whistles into seams that do not sing when a gust presses outside. The house refuses to be a musical instrument for the wind. There are rooms within rooms that are not enclosed by timber. A bed under a canopy is a room because it has edges for air to respect. A table with a cloth that reaches the floor is a room for feet and a place where a bowl left after supper will not turn to ice by morning. A clothes press that holds linen warmed in the afternoon sun becomes a room for hands at night when work is done. The larger space that we call a room is not the only climate. Many small climates live inside it, each arranged around a person and a purpose. Precision saves fuel. Precision saves health. You may ask where the fire is in all this talk of warmth. The fire is elsewhere, or it is small, or it is used in a way that does not fill the lungs with smoke. If there is a stove, it serves more than food. Its bricks remember heat and share that memory slowly through the day. If there is only a place outdoors where pots are heated, then those pots and the stones that hold them become the couriers of heat. A house that does not scorch its air does not need to waste air on getting rid of smoke. It can keep the composition of the room steady and let moisture escape through a small path near the ceiling, while the calm of the lower room remains untouched. Maintenance is as much a technology as timber. Fingers learn to read a wall the way eyes read a page. A seam that feels sharp to the touch is a seam that is losing heat. A board that whistles on a windy night needs a smear of clay and straw, not a prayer. The winter habit is a daily walk from corner to corner where the hand tests and the eye listens. The reward is not drama. The reward is that nothing dramatic happens. No draft wakes a child at midnight. No corner develops a wet temper that will breed mold. A quiet house is not lazy. It is the sum of attention. Materials have characters, and the builders of such houses treat them like neighbors. Stone is cool-minded and slow. It is asked to carry heat from noon to evening and from evening to morning. Clay is humble and clever. It seals. It smooths. It adds mass without arrogance. It can be repaired in a few minutes with a bowl and a bit of straw. Wood is quick to please and quick to sulk. It is placed where hands will touch it and where warmth must be felt first. Fabric is soft but stubborn. It hangs. It filters. It divides. Nothing is used against its nature, because using things against their nature makes extra work and extra fuel. Notice also what the house does not do. It does not try to heat everything. It does not pretend that one room can be summer while another is winter. It allows a gradient, gentle and understandable, from the warmest core where people gather to the calmer edges where people pass through. The body understands this without instruction. You stand near the inner wall to read. You sit by the table where the floor remembers the day. You cross the outer passage without asking it to be what it cannot be. By not demanding extravagance from the house, people save their strength for work that cannot be negotiated. Like weather in the fields. The plan of the house is a story in which the first chapter is the entrance, the second is the wall, the third is the floor, the fourth is the ceiling, and the fifth is the way objects take their turn. If any chapter is missing, the ending is poor. If all are present, the story is easy to live inside. You do not need to know the story as theory to benefit. You need only to keep the habits that previous hands taught the space. Close this first door before opening the next. Place the warm jar in the niche, and not on the table that sits in the middle of moving air. Brush the seam with clay when it begins to speak. Lower the canopy before you sleep, and lift it when you air the room. None of these acts burn fuel. All of them burn less of you. Sometimes a guest from a different century will say that such houses look dark. In summer they are not. In winter they choose light that does not cost heat. A small window shows a slice of sky and a generous well of shadow where eyes can rest. Candles are not thrown against white walls that demand to be fed. Candles meet clay that accepts a small flame without greed, and reflects it with a softness that honors night. You can work. You can speak. You can sit without huddling. That is enough. Before we leave this room and consider the life of objects more closely, hold this thought. The house is not fighting the cold in a contest of strength. It is teaching the cold manners. It does that by giving heat a place to live, a route to travel, and a memory to trust. The next part of our journey will follow that memory into the furniture and the tools and the everyday things that carry warmth like a quiet breath. If a wall can remember the sun, imagine what a bench can remember of the hands that rested there, and what a clay jar can remember of a morning fire. A house that breathes in winter does not begin with walls. It begins with things. Objects stand where air slows. Wood remembers the warmth of hands. Clay holds the afterglow of water that cooled there. Fabric turns motion into hush. In a room that claims no grand fire, furniture and tools are not background. They are the quiet lungs of warmth. When people here say the room is kinder after noon, they are not speaking in poetry. They are talking about a dozen humble bodies that have stored sunlight and labor and steam, and now give it back without smoke. Consider the chest of oak pressed against the inner wall. It is heavy because it is meant to be heavy. The lid closes with a mild groan, and the iron strap is dark with years of touch. There are winter shirts folded inside, and blankets that smell of summer fields. But the chest's first work is not storage. It is mass. When a warmed jar rests on the chest for a time, the wood drinks a portion of that heat and keeps it with a patience that air does not have. Later, when someone sits there to lace a boot or mend a seam, the chill does not jump through the boards to the spine. A person, not a flame, is allowed to be the center of the moment. You could weigh the comfort in a kitchen by the weight of the furniture, if weight were not so shy a thing. Next to the chest, there is often a long bench built into the wall. It looks simple, just a plank with legs, but the placement is exact. This is a place where the gentle downward slide of warmer air along the inner surface gathers in a shallow bay. You can feel it with your hands if you wait. Knees rest there without complaint. Old backs let go of their knots. In the hardest weeks of the season, someone will tuck a warmed brick in the dark space beneath that bench before dusk, and the wood above will forget the cruelty it once had. Children learn this first. They drift to the bench as if guided by a rope, and the house seems to draw them there because the house knows the map of its own calm. Across the room hangs fabric with a purpose. Curtains in this place are not a vanity. A wool curtain that falls to the floor beside a door makes a soft wall. When the latch lifts, the first sting of outside air finds cloth instead of faces. The cloth moves, and the air tires, and then it stops. A thinner cloth hangs near the inner corners, where the wall once felt like a knife. There is a palm's width of space behind that cloth. Air rises there, slows there, cools there, and in cooling, it forgets to make the room cruel. People say the cloth keeps out ghosts. That is true if you call a draft a ghost. On a night when a storm prowls, the curtain is a gatekeeper that does not sleep. The only sounds are the small sounds of fabric speaking to air. Look down to the floors. There are layered mats made of rush and coarse weave at the bottom, then felt and woven wool above. Each layer holds a different job. The low layer eats the cold that climbs from the ground. The middle holds the quiet that the lower has made. The upper gives feet a softness that tells the body to stop bracing for pain. A person standing on bare boards breathes with the shoulders. A person standing on layered mats breathes with the belly. That difference matters more than anyone would admit in a world where work waits at dawn. In passages where boots scuff all day, the mats are thick and honest. Beside beds and near the table, the woven tops are cleaner and soft. In the hour before sleep, when the room would otherwise declare its stone nature, these surfaces make a case for mercy. Shelves have their own small climate. The lower shelf near the floor is a place for heavier pots and wooden bowls that do not mind that the air there moves more quickly. The next shelf up is for jars that carry warmth from the hearth room. A clay pitcher filled with hot water will not be thrown into the open middle of the room where air takes it away in a moment. It will be tucked into that shelf, deep enough that light is a stripe on its shoulder and darkness wraps the rest. The wall behind it deepens the calm. The wood beneath it takes a taste of the heat. In the evening, the jar no longer scolds. Yet, the shelf has become a silent neighbor that does not forget kindness. On the upper line of the room, there is sometimes a simple plank above a doorway, more than a shelf and less than a ledge. A soft dome of warmth gathers under ceilings. This plank interrupts that dome and spills a portion of it back along the wall where people live. A woman might place a sack of grain there to keep it dry and find later that bread rises faster on mornings after a frost. A man might tuck a pair of stockings there after the evening wash and smile when he pulls them on in the dawn, and the wool is not cruel. It is not a trick. It is the way heat insists on living in places, not in emptiness. There are tools that work only in winter, and their names tell you what a room expects. A bed warmer is not really for bed. It is for wood and linen and air. It is a vessel of copper or clay or thick earthenware filled with water that was heated earlier where smoke was allowed to wander. The vessel is wrapped in cloth, and it sits under a blanket or at the foot of the bed or inside the box bed for less time than a candle burns. The wood remembers. The linen remembers. The air inside the bed canopy becomes forgiving. Then, the vessel is moved to a bench or placed in a wooden box with a lid, so that its last work is to bleed warmth into a piece of furniture that will be kind in the hour before dawn. The vessel never tries to heat a room. It tries to change a mood, and moods are what people live by. Some houses carry braziers, but not for flame. A brazier holds stones that have been heated elsewhere. A stone that sings when it leaves the coals will sing less when it meets the air, and it will sing softly for hours if it meets a blanket first. Place those stones under a table that wears a long cloth, and you have made a warm cove for feet and knees and talk. Place them in a wooden box that does not quite close, and you have made a small animal that breathes comfort into a corner where old fingers card wool. There is no smoke because there is no fire here. There is only stored day. The house is full of stored day. Consider also the pottery that sits in plain sight. Clay is honest. It warms slowly and cools slowly and never pretends to be more than it is. On a winter afternoon, when washing must be done, a basin is filled with water that is hot enough to matter. The basin sits a while on the table where the cloth falls long. Steam wraps the face and rises toward the low ceiling, softening any sharpness there. When the water has grown to the temperature of hands, the basin is moved to a place against the inner wall. The wall asks for a share, and the basin obliges. The evening will be calmer for that exchange. Later, the same basin may hold parsnips or coarse salt. It is still doing winter work because the clay that cooled holds an even temper that does not shock food or tongue. There is even a place for animals in the economy of warmth. A cat on a bench is a warmer of wood as well as a keeper of mice. A dog at a threshold slows the lace of cold that tries to creep along the floor. People notice this and respect it and do not call it childish. They understand that breath and blood and fur are as much a part of the house as clay and linen. In the worst weeks, an old hen in a basket near the inner wall gives the room a presence that no contrivance can mimic. The air listens to life and grows patient. Clothing in such a house is also furniture in disguise. A row of cloaks on pegs near the inner door thickens the air there and makes a second skin for the threshold. The cloaks are not thrown deep into the room where they would earn a little comfort for shoulders while stealing a great deal from the door. They hang where work is hardest. A line of mittens above the warm shelf is a promise for tomorrow rather than a luxury today. A wool cap placed in a shallow niche reaches a small above ordinary temperature, and the first minutes of a morning chore do not feel like punishment. People do not heat a person. They heat the person's day, moment by moment. There are crafts that flourish in winter because the room is planned for them. Spinning and carding prefer steady air that is not too dry and not too wet. This room allows both, by venting the high damp and protecting the low calm. A distaff by the inner wall is a flag that tells you the climate is right without a single word. Woodworking on small things likes a bench that does not bite the fingers with cold. The bench remembers heat from the last pot that rested there. A slow current of warm air slides along the wall and passes under the craftsman's wrists. He does not think of this. He only works longer without anger. The objects have taken the thought so that a person can give the attention. There is a ritual to handling the objects of warmth, and it reads like an inherited prayer. In the late afternoon, a jar is warmed and placed on the shelf above the door. When the sky begins to turn, the jar is moved to the bench, and a brick that was sitting in the safer fire is wrapped and moved to the box that sits near the foot of the bed. Curtains are checked by hand, not by sight, and the thick roll at the bottom of the door is pressed to make sure it has not gathered damp. The mats are smoothed, and the upper cloth is shaken and laid back so that the fibres trap more air. None of this is dramatic. All of it is decisive. The room that would have turned sharp at night turns mild. Knowledge is shared in gestures. A grandmother will show a child where to put a bowl in the afternoon so that the apples inside do not taste like a cellar at dawn. A father will show a son how to hold a hand flat near the corner of a shelf and feel whether it is worth placing a warmed cup there for the benefit of fingers that will prune in the washing water. A neighbour will knock and borrow a stone that fits a box better because her old box has a crack that will not be mended until spring. The village library for this kind of knowledge does not have shelves. It has doors that open and people who step through them. At the end of a day, you can read the room by the way the air tastes, not the taste of bacon fat or wood smoke, which are joys for other rooms, but the taste of linen and clay, and beeswax from a candle, and the faint mineral sweetness of stone that has not been allowed to get wet. The taste says that the room is not fighting with itself. The taste says that many small acts have agreed with one another. The taste says the people who live here will not wake with sore throats or tightened shoulders. These are expensive symptoms in a life that depends on work and on the breath to do it. Sometimes a visitor will desire a single explanation, as if warmth were a trick that could be written in one line on a scrap. The truth resists that kind of appetite. Warmth in this house is distributed authority. It is what happens when you give each object a task it can actually do, and then let time do the rest. A chair cannot heat a whole room, but it can make the act of mending tolerable. A jar cannot keep a night comfortable, but it can teach a wall to be gentler. A curtain cannot stop winter, but it can turn the first sting into a sigh. Together, these modest talents add to something that is not modest at all. They add to a season that a family can live through without losing its voice. There is also honesty in the limits. On the coldest nights, you still see breath. The world is not turned into summer by any of this work. People are not fooled. They do not demand that the room be as soft as a dream. They ask that it not be cruel. The difference between cruelty and mildness is a difference worth all the craft you can collect. Within that difference, songs are sung, stories are told, a shirt is finished, a child sleeps, An old person smiles without shivering. In the language of winter, that is wealth. Before we leave these objects and step into the true night of the house, think of one more scene. A candle has been set in a small niche that has seen 100 such flames. The niche warms a little, and the wall around it warms a little, and the air near it warms a little more. Someone closes a book of prayers or a list of accounts and covers the candle. The glow on the plaster fades, but the warmth it made does not fall to zero. It becomes the gentlest kind of memory. That memory is what Part 4 belongs to. It is the hour of box beds and canopies, and the practice of sleeping inside a room that you have built with fabric and breath. If a bench can hold comfort for an evening, what can a bed hold for a whole night? Night does not simply arrive in a medieval house. It is prepared for. It is received like a careful guest. Twilight gathers in the beams and along the edges of the floor, and before darkness becomes a fact, hands have already shaped the air that will carry everyone through until morning. Someone has checked the roll of cloth at the bottom of the door. Someone has felt the seam where a shutter meets the frame and has pressed in toe until the seam falls silent. Someone has warmed a clay jug and carried it into the room where people will sleep. The house is no longer doing large work. It is doing precise work, and precise work is what night asks for. The bed is not only a place to lie down. The bed is a small architecture. In many homes, the bed is a box. Walls of wood with a mouth that closes like a cupboard. The wood is thick enough to speak slowly to the air and thin enough to answer the warmth of a body without delay. The box is set along an inner wall, not against the skin of the house that faces weather. Inside the box, there is a mattress of straw that has been shaken and turned in the afternoon so that the stalks will hold little pockets of air. The linen has been brought from a press where sunlight and the memory of a warm room live in the fibers. Over the linen waits a wool blanket, heavy enough to teach the body to be quiet. And above all of this, a canopy of fabric that falls to close the room within the room. It is not superstition to say that the canopy makes a climate. The air inside is not trapped. It is guided. A gap is always left at the top, no wider than a finger. Freshness enters through that small permission, and the heavy air that has done its work of taking away damp breath rises into the gap and is gone. The body is not smothered. The body is held. When two people lie under such a canopy, their breathing becomes the clock of the space, and the space listens and answers. The blanket does not do the work alone. The wood and the linen and the fabric, above all, lend their patience. A room that might be cold at the center becomes kind inside these softer walls. The candle can go out. The warmth does not. The ritual of putting a bed to rights has been learned by hands that learned it from other hands. An hour before sleep, a jug is filled with hot water where smoke is allowed to wander. The jug is wrapped and set at the foot of the bed so that the board there forgets the chill that day left in it. The jug is moved once or twice so that the heat is shared. If there are stones that have been singing in embers, they are brushed clean and wrapped in thick cloth and slid into a wooden box with a lid that does not quite close. That box is not a toy. It is a slow animal that breathes warmth under the bed or near the knees. A basin that held hot water earlier is turned upside down on the floor beneath the bench by the bed, so that the floor there does not bite bare feet when the morning asks for motion. None of this is dramatic. All of it is effective. Sleep comes into these rooms with more than temperature. It arrives with sound. A box bed has a voice like a seashell when wind presses outside. The curtain stirs and then settles. The wood answers with a long, quiet tone that comfort understands. In the distant parts of the house, animals shift in their stalls, and are still. A candle burnishes the inside of the niche for a few minutes, and then someone covers the flame with a palm from the side to avoid a rush of air, and the last light climbs the plaster and disappears. Darkness here does not mean danger. It means that the house has decided which work belongs to night. The furniture remembers the day, and the walls remember the sun, and the bed remembers the first warm jar. In such a place, children learn to sleep inside a nest made by thoughtful people. A small bed is a half-sized box placed a little nearer to the inner wall than the bed of their parents. The door of the small bed is often left open so that comfort can be seen and so that a watchful adult can hear every change in breath. A warm stone wrapped in cloth does not go at their feet, but under the board so that the heat is gentle and indirect. The canopy is hung lower, and the fabric is heavier to quiet fidgets and storms alike. A prayer or a story is told in a voice that has learned to fit the space. A story that is shouted breaks the air. A story that is measured knits the air. These are not fine points to a family that must wake strong. The old have their own rooms within rooms. An elder chooses a bed that holds warmth longer, knows which corner, avoids the faint seam that still resists perfection. The elder has a shawl that has slept on the warm shelf above the doorway, and that shawl becomes the first layer when shoulders settle for the night. There is a stool within reach, on which a small jug lives, not to drink from in the dark, but to hold a little warmth that keeps fingers honest, and works the stiffness out of knuckles when sleep shares the bed with ache. The elder sleeps in peace, because night has been planned with their breath in mind. Illness changes the rules slightly, but not the principles. A person who coughs is placed so that air inside the canopy can be renewed without chill. The small gap at the top may be made a little larger. The curtain around the bed may be lifted an inch so that fresh air licks the floor and rises in a clean thread up the side without crossing the chest. Warm cloths are set along the ribs, and a warmed cup rests in a niche so that there is no reason to expose the face to a large space to drink. The room speaks to weakness with careful grammar. It grants freshness and denies shock. It allows moisture to leave and forbids a draught to enter. In this way, a house becomes a gentle nurse that does not miss a night. Privacy lives here, and so does togetherness. A bed that closes with small doors gives a couple a world of their own, but it also allows a child with a bad dream to crawl onto the bench outside those doors and fall asleep with an ear to the wood and a palm against the warm panel. A visitor in deep winter may be given a pallet near the inner wall, and a curtain will become a kind door that costs nothing and keeps dignity intact. The house knows that human beings must rest well if they are to be decent to one another tomorrow. The box beds and canopy rooms make that decent future more likely. You might think that such tight spaces would smell of confinement. They do not, because the house has learned a vocabulary of breathing. During the day, the bedding was aired, while the door was propped, and the tiny high vent of the room was open to the width of a spoon. In the evening, the vent is set to a width of a reed, and the bed itself is closed only after the air inside has grown calm. It is not the volume of air that keeps a sleeper comfortable. It is the pace of change. Too fast, and the lungs complain, and the skin becomes the messenger of cold. Too slow, and the head grows heavy. The canopy keeps the pace wise. Night has its geography outside the bed as well. A table is still a room for feet if the cloth reaches the floor. A chair set at the correct angle to the inner wall becomes an alcove in which a reader can sit for a few minutes after everyone else has fallen quiet. The reader sets a cup, warmed at the hearth earlier, on the deep shelf above the door, so that a finger touching the handle now and then will not be punished. The reader has a candle in a small niche, where the light is thoughtful rather than proud. When the page is closed, the candle is pinched out, and the last warmth of that small flame becomes an ointment for the corner of the room. Old books remember such night kindnesses. They do not warp. They do not go damp. There are houses where several bodies share a single bed. Not from poverty alone, but from sense. The warmth of companions makes the bed a climate that a lone body could not easily sustain. The ones who must rise before dawn lie nearer the edge where the curtain can part without waking those who need long sleep. The smallest children lie where the weight of blankets is less. The heavy sleepers lie where the wooden side will stop them if they wander in dreams. In a world where firewood and time are precious, a bed that holds many is not a hardship. It is a guarantee. The guarantee is not only of warmth, it is of company in the hours when fear likes to practice its craft. Listen to the night, and you will hear how the house edits the world. A strong gust arrives and knocks at the outer shutter. The knock becomes a duller tap as the courtyard refuses to be a corridor. The tap becomes a whisper at the inner door because the door sits in a pocket that refuses the rush. The whisper becomes a change in pressure that the curtain notices and softens. By the time anything reaches the bed canopy, it is no more than a polite suggestion that the season is still doing its job. The sleeper turns on the straw with a sigh instead of a shiver. This is architecture reduced to its smallest honest purpose. The worst nights do come. The kind of night when snow seeks the smallest path and tries to live there. On those nights, the household increases the pace of care. The cloth roll at the door is checked twice. The curtain is brushed with the back of a hand to feel whether air is flowing as it should. The jug is refreshed before its last heat is gone. The elder is asked whether the shawl from the warm shelf should be traded for the thicker one from the chest. A slice of bread is set near the bed so that first hunger in the morning meets food at once. These preparations have the feel of prayer, not the begging kind, the grateful kind, the kind that thanks the house for keeping its end of the bargain. Dawn teaches whether the skill was enough. If frost paints the inside of a shutter and not the inside of a wall, then the plan held. If water in the basin near the outer passage crusts, while water in the cup near the inner bench has only a fog, then the air moved as the house wished. If the straw rustles with a dry sound when the bed is opened and not with a sour one, then the gap at the top was the right size. People who live like this wake into a practice. They do not count the night as lost or won. They count it as learned. Each winter adds small knowledge. Each morning sends that knowledge forward through hands that fold linen and tighten pegs and smooth mats and set stones back near a fire that is safe. There are nights when love has its own heat and nights when sorrow has its own cold. The house respects both. A canopy that closes becomes a space where two people can speak in low voices without making the whole room carry their words. A canopy lifted high becomes a sign that a body needs others near. A box bed, with both doors open, becomes a bier when a life is done. And the same wood that kept breathing alive keeps memory close for a day before the last walk. Architecture is never only physics. It is the arrangement of what we can endure. The design of night is the design of being human together, with mercy. What we call technology in another age lives here in gestures that are too humble to be named machines. A pair of stockings warmed on the upper shelf before bed is a device. A curtain that falls to the floor and stops the low river of cold is a device. A child taught to place a hot stone in a box and not under a blanket is a device and an education. These devices have no iron teeth and no gears that flash. Yet they deliver the one outcome that matters. People sleep. They wake without anger in their lungs. They go to work with joints that have not been punished by their own homes. If you have ever slept in a wide room of modern kind, and felt small and cold in the very center of your own house, you will understand the genius here. The genius is not in making summer indoors. The genius is in shaping winter until it is a companion and not a judge. The bed is the most delicate of all the instruments that perform this shaping. It collects the day's small stores of warmth and arranges them around a breathing body. It harmonizes wood, straw, cloth, water, and time. It turns a few degrees into a night of rest. It persuades the mind that morning is possible. Before we leave the bed and lift the curtain and step back into the larger room, hold a single image. A child lies under the canopy and watches the last ember softening in a small iron pan that once held a warmed stone. The child raises a hand and feels with a palm the ceiling of fabric just above. The fabric is not cold. It is not hot. It is kind. Outside, the village has done its work, and the wind has slowed. Inside, the walls have done their work, and the air moves in a circle that keeps faith with breath. The bed has done its work and has made a small country where sleep is safe. The question that night asks is simple. If a bed can turn a room gentle, what can an entire day of habits do to the cold that waits beyond the threshold of morning? Knowledge of warmth in a medieval house did not live in books. It lived in hands, in the way fingers pressed a seam, in the way a palm read a wall, in the way someone listened for the sound a door made when a gust tested it. The house kept many lessons, and the people who lived inside added to those lessons one winter at a time. A person did not become an expert by declaring it. A person became reliable by noticing small things, and by letting small things accumulate into a habit. Warmth in this world was not a feeling that arrived all at once. It was a practice of attention. Morning began the practice all over again. A woman stepped to the window and felt the glass with the back of her knuckles. If the frost spoke there and not on the inside plaster, then yesterday's work was good. She touched the shutter seam and decided whether to leave a fold of cloth in place or tie it back for light. She laid a palm on the inner wall near the bench and read the tone of the stone. Not the temperature that a device would name with a number, but the story of how fast the stone was giving back its memory of yesterday. A man crossed the room with his hand near the floor and felt where the river of cold would try to run if it were allowed, and he placed a mat there and smoothed it with a slow press. A child watched and then copied, because this was how the house taught. Breakfast happened in the same space that would keep the family safe that night. The tablecloth fell to the floor and made a small room for feet, while porridge steamed in bowls that had been warmed without any show. A jar that had slept on the upper shelf came down and gave its kindness to a sleeve. People ate. They spoke in ordinary voices, and they did not spend their breath on shivering. The house was already working because last night had prepared today. There is a loop of care in such a place. Late afternoon makes night gentle, and a gentle night makes morning honest. Tools for this work were simple and ready. Clay, straw, linen, wool, wood, stone, water. None of them promised more than they could do. Clay sealed and smoothed. It took the chatter out of a joint and turned it into a seam that would keep quiet when wind pressed a shutter. Straw stuffed in a door roll made a soft wall that lay on the floor and told the low cold that it would have to climb like a tired pilgrim if it wanted to enter. Linen was brought into the sun when winter granted a bright hour, and the linen kept that hour in its threads until evening. Wool was always the faithful friend that forgave a person for not being rich. Repairs were constant and therefore were not called repairs. They were ordinary conversation with the world. A crack appeared, where a beam met a wall, and a hand filled it with a mix of clay and chopped plant fiber, pressed it, smoothed it with a wet palm, and coaxed the surface to look as if it had been that way forever. A shutter hinge sighed, and a few drops of rendered fat calmed it. A rug curled at the edge where people walked, and a clever stitch and a tucked strip of old cloth weighed it into honesty again. The house did not punish the family for these small weaknesses. It rewarded small answers with a larger calm. Fuel was not a solution without thought. Even a rich woodpile could not make a foolish room wise. People knew when to build a cooking fire and when to carry the heat instead. On days when the sky held still and smoke would climb like a straight prayer, someone might simmer something that lifted the spirit and let that steam move under the ceiling in order to soften the sharpness there. On days when the air outside pressed down like a lid, a careful person warmed stones and water in a safer place and brought the heat into the room in containers that did not change the air itself. The lungs did not have to argue with the house. The house chose methods that let breath be simple. Ventilation was not a slogan. It was a schedule that the room kept with the weather. A small opening near the top of the wall allowed dampness to leave the space during work, and then was eased closed a little when the family gathered near evening. The opening was never a gaping mouth that swallowed comfort. It was a narrow path that let out what needed to go and kept what mattered. A person checked it the way a farmer checks a gate. Not a glance, but a moment with a hand on the frame to feel whether air was moving at the right pace. The body is a meter that a wise house uses. There were times when mistakes taught more than success. A family once moved a bed to an outer wall because the corner looked clean and bright, and the first clear night put frost beneath the pillow. They moved the bed back the next day and told the story to anyone who would listen. Another family placed a large new shelf high on the wall because they desired room for bowls. And the shelf caught all the warmth that wanted to spread, and the room felt empty at the level of human beings. They cut the shelf narrower and discovered a better place for the bowls. Mistakes were not shame in this culture. They were lessons that became a stronger house. Seasons offered their own instruction. Early winter could be glamorous and dangerous because the memory of autumn still lived in the walls. People would trust too long, and then a snap of cold would make a room cruel and wake a child coughing. By midwinter, every surface knew its work, and life became a rhythm that felt slow but was in truth busy with care. Late winter was the hardest trial, not because the cold was deepest, but because fuel was lower, and spirits were tired, and any forgotten seam would be punished by the wind that always returns before spring. The knowledge of warmth included the knowledge of morale. A song in the afternoon mattered. A tidy bench mattered. A loaf shared mattered more than calories. The room listened to such things and seemed to add a degree for free when people were decent to one another. Community did not end at the door. A neighbour might come with a bundle of hedge clippings to share because he had pruned on the north side and knew that another family had a gap in their outer corner that would be kinder if it had a rough fence for a month. A woman might lend a heavy jar to a household with a new baby because the weight of that jar would make the bench hold warmth longer, and a mother's back would get a rest during feeding. A boy might be sent with a handful of tow and a lesson, and he would watch a grandmother press the fibres into a seam by the window while she told him about the winter when the river froze to the mill tail. The knowledge of warmth travelled on feet and in stories. The calendar of work was tuned to the architecture. On wash days, more steam moved through the room, and the upper slit near the ceiling worked harder. On baking days, the mass of the cooking place did a portion of the heating for free, and a family would gather later in the main room after the bricks in the oven had given away their slow gift. On mending days, the bench near the inner wall was busy all afternoon, and evening was less complicated because that bench had learned from the heat of lifeless jars and from the warmth of living hands. This is how a house and a family share the burden of the season. Each does what it can at the right time. Children were taught the names of things, along with the reasons for placing those things where they belonged. A roll of cloth stuffed with straw had a name in each village, and a child learned to put the roll against the door, as if putting a sleeping animal against a gap. A canopy rope had a knot that a small hand could tie in the dark. A warming stone had a cloth that always belonged to it and never to the hearth, because habits prevent burns more surely than warnings. The next generation did not inherit comfort. They inherited the ability to make it. Stories carried conclusions that were also instructions. Older people spoke of the winter when the wind found a straight path through two doors because a guest did not close the outer door before opening the inner one. The tale became a gentle rule that everyone followed without resentment. There were sayings that helped memory: warm the house, and the house will warm you. Heat objects, and objects will heat the air. Slow the wind, and the wind will carry your kindness. The words were simple, and the work was not glamorous. But the house accepted that and paid back those small courtesies. Economy had a moral dimension here. A room that wastes heat is a room that asks more than is fair from the forest. A family that pays attention to seams and habits and layers needs less fuel and leaves more trees standing to hold back floods in spring and to give shade to animals in summer. The people did not speak in those modern terms. They spoke of good stewardship and of the duty to children who would inherit the same fields and the same roofline. To make a house easy to heat by thought is a kindness to the land as well as to the lungs. All of this knowledge can sound like rules, but inside the room it felt like ease. Ease is the reward of good design. The room did not ask for constant heroism. It asked for a little care in the right places. It asked you to place the warmed jar in a niche, to pull a curtain that turns a corner into a calm, to brush a seam with wet clay when it begins to speak. The habits added minutes of comfort, that added hours of rest, that added days of health, that added years of strength. Warmth became a story that the house and the people told together, not a contest between a flame and a winter. There were days of celebration when many bodies added their heat to the air, and the room became generous. Those days did not tempt the family to neglect the careful plan. The benches still held their positions. The mats were still layered thoughtfully. The small vent still did its slow exchange so that the walls would not sweat. This restraint kept the house from swinging between extremes. The house avoided fevers. In that steadiness, people found energy for the work that did not allow negotiations, the work of fields and animals and tools that must be mended. The knowledge of warmth also included the wisdom to leave some cold alone. Bedrooms were not asked to be summer. Passages were allowed to be brisk. The first step out of a bed was prepared so that feet would not cry. But the larger world of the house kept its honest gradient from inner to outer. People could feel where they were without thinking. That felt right to them. It guided children back toward the core without scolding, and guided adults toward rest without lists. A house that tells the truth about its own climate is a house that does not surprise and therefore does not frighten. On certain mornings after a storm, people walked the village and read the surfaces the way a sailor reads a harbour. Snow lay evenly along the backs of barns. Drifts told you where a passage needed a hurdle or a rack of wood to spoil the wind's plan. The sound of a latch in a neighbour's house at dawn spoke of a door that was not set deep enough. These observations did not turn into blame. They turned into help. A boy carried a bundle of withies, and a man carried an auger, and by dusk a simple fence stood where the air had run too quickly. The village tightened its coat, and the next night was kinder to everyone. Failures were remembered carefully because they were expensive. A winter of illness taught a family to vent a canopy more wisely. A fire that smoked taught a household to move heat by objects instead of by flame, on days when the sky sat on the rooftops. A year when fuel ran short taught everyone the value of a mat in the right place and of a curtain that kissed the floor. These hard lessons hardened into wisdom that made later winters seem almost gentle. There is a phrase that people used for rooms that were right. They said the room had manners. A room with manners does not grab your breath, and it does not steal heat from your bones when you sit. It keeps its voice low, and it keeps its promises. Such a room is not an accident. It is the sum of the knowledge of warmth. It is the product of eyes that notice, of hands that repair, of minds that remember, of neighbors that share, of children that learn. Now and then, a traveler from a later age will step into such a house in winter and will marvel that the air feels calm without devices humming. The traveler will say that the room is not hot, and the people who live there will agree. It is not hot. It is sufficient. It is a room that does not get cold. That is the goal. Hot is a spectacle. Not cold is a life. Before we leave this chapter and consider what a modern dwelling might borrow from these older ways, hold in your mind the 3 sentences that the house keeps repeating through the season. Warm the things that touch you, and they will warm the space that holds you. Slow the wind at every scale from village to threshold, and the fire will not labor. Teach the room its manners every day with small acts, and it will remember them through the night. If a family can keep these 3 sentences alive, the cold can be made honest rather than cruel. Which of these sentences would you test first in your own home? And how would you teach your walls to remember what your hands already know? ChatGPT said, "The fire that burned in the medieval house was never the center of the story. The center was the quiet arrangement that allowed people to live without fear of the cold. By the time a winter ended, the house had proved itself again as something more than shelter. It was a companion that thought slowly. Every joint, every curtain, every piece of fabric had learned to cooperate. The people who lived within such walls were not engineers by name, yet they practiced an architecture of patience. Their wisdom is not lost. It only waits for eyes that know how to see it. When morning comes after the last frost, the world outside the window shines in silence. The field that had been iron for months softens. The courtyard smells of earth. The mats are lifted and beaten. The seams are checked. And every object that carried warmth through the dark months is thanked in small gestures. The jar is washed. The curtain is folded. The straw in the bed is turned and aired. Nothing here is thrown away because nothing here was taken for granted. The people did not ask for a miracle each winter. They asked for continuity, a room that cooled slowly, a bed that forgave, a community that remembered what it had learned last year. That was enough. Our time measures warmth differently. We turn a switch and expect the air itself to obey. The sound of machines replaces the sound of a door closing softly against a draft. We have forgotten that warmth is not a number. Warmth is a rhythm. It is the rhythm of light against clay, of breath against fabric, of wood, absorbing the story of the day and returning it in the dark. When we chase constant temperature, we lose the feeling of companionship with our houses. We live with comfort, but not with memory. There is a strange humility in the old idea that a house and a person are partners. The walls were expected to work, but they were also expected to be tended. The family gave the house attention, and the house gave back stability. The same could be true now. If we remembered how to look, modern walls can still learn from the discipline of thick stone. Modern fabrics can still learn from curtains that kissed the floor. Even a small apartment can find its manners again if we guide air instead of fighting it. The old ways are not nostalgia. They are physics and gratitude, disguised as routine. Imagine standing in one of those rooms as night falls. The walls have the color of baked earth. The light is low, and the air does not move unless someone does. You hear wood creak, not as complaint, but as breath. Somewhere, a jug still holds warmth from the cooking of the day. The house feels alive, not because it makes noise, but because it listens. It holds your movement, your words, and even your silence without letting them vanish. The warmth you feel is not a blanket of heat, but a conversation of surfaces. Each object gives back what it was given, no more and no less. That balance was the triumph of medieval comfort. It was never about abundance. It was about proportion. The builders and dwellers knew that if you treat materials with respect, they answer. Clay and wood, fabric and stone, they do not need miracles. They need a relationship. They need to be trusted to do their quiet work over hours and days. The moment you stop expecting a sudden transformation and start expecting small constancies, a house begins to feel human again. The lesson that drifts out of such a house and into our century is simple. Warmth is not an achievement. It is a dialogue. It begins with design, continues through habit, and ends in gratitude. It does not demand new materials. It demands old attention. If you warm an object, it will warm the air. If you slow the wind, it will forget its sharpness. If you pay attention to your dwelling as something alive, it will become kinder. The people who built and repaired and slept in these spaces knew this without needing to write it down. Their comfort was the result of listening. When you step out of that quiet world into our own, the shock is not the temperature, but the speed. Everything now is impatient. The heating system, the noise, the lights. It is possible to make a room bright and warm in seconds, but the warmth that appears so quickly leaves just as fast. The older way would tell you to slow down. Let the house find its pace. Let the day's light and the night's stillness teach your body where you are. A house that never rushes, you will never betray you in the cold. For the people of the Middle Ages, the end of winter was not a victory against nature. It was a handshake. They had survived because they had cooperated with the season, not because they had defeated it. The same humility might still save us from waste, from noise, from the loneliness of convenience. The old house whispers that you do not need to chase constant heat. You need only to shape a life that loses little. You need to remember that warmth comes from the memory of things, not the conquest of elements. If you close your eyes now, you can still see the glow inside that box bed, the curtain stirring slightly in the breath of two sleeping people, the frost retreating from the inner wall as dawn begins its patient work. You can almost hear the cloth roll shifting under the door as the air outside changes its mind. The house is calm because it knows how to wait. Every lesson you've just heard was carved into its wood and pressed into its clay by countless anonymous hands. They were not trying to impress us. They were trying to endure. So, when you look around your own space tonight, see what can be made to remember. A curtain that truly reaches the floor. A heavy bowl that holds its warmth. A routine that gives your house a slower rhythm. Each act is a way of continuing the conversation that began centuries ago in villages where wind learned manners and walls learned patience. You do not need to live in the past to inherit its intelligence. A warm house, they believed, is not one that is hot, but one that does not get cold. That thought still fits the modern world better than any thermostat. It is the secret heart of every home that has ever felt right when you came in from the wind. It is what we forget when we think comfort comes from power instead of care. If you remember it. If you let your own rooms learn that calm tempo, you will understand what those old builders already knew, that the truest heat is invisible. That warmth is the memory of attention, and that to keep it alive you must tend not just the fire, but the quiet around it. If this journey through their hidden wisdom has left you curious, stay with us. The next story will step beyond a single house and into the streets of the medieval town itself, where the very layout of walls and courtyards conspired to tame the wind. The story of warmth does not end with one home. It stretches through every lane and stone. Subscribe, and come back to The Poor Historian, where the past still holds a steady flame for those willing to watch it flicker slowly